The initial warning that the USS Abraham Lincoln faced assault arrived not through radar displays or orbital alerts, but via an abrupt electromagnetic pulse that cascaded through every detection array in the carrier battle group. At exactly 03 for 7 hours, the pre-dawn sky blazed with fire trails as 140 Iranian speed attack vessels burst from concealed shore locations, their wakes slicing luminescent paths through the dark Persian Gulf waters. At that same moment, 73 unmanned aerial platforms climbed like a metallic cloud, their propulsion systems shrieking as they surged toward the American fleet. Yet these constituted merely the initial phase. 240 kilometers northward, invisible to American detection, 12 Chinese J-20 stealth fighters were already closing on their weapons release coordinates, their internal bays loaded with among the most cutting-edge anti-vessel missiles ever fielded in warfare. The ambush was triggered. The most elaborate synchronized strike on U.S. maritime units in decades had commenced, and the Abraham Lincoln had 97 minutes to endure. Intelligence reconstructions assembled afterward disclosed that scheming for this action started at minimum 8 weeks prior, when the J-20 fighters left Hatan Air Base in Xinjiang province, disguised as a standard training deployment. Their genuine endpoint was Shahid Nojaz Air Base in western Iran, a repositioning that escaped detection completely by Western intelligence networks. Joining the stealth fighters were 2 KJ-500 airborne early alert aircraft and 1 KJ-200, furnishing the Chinese element with substantial beyond-horizon targeting capacity. The strategic reasoning was ruthlessly straightforward. Iran would supply the bludgeon surges of disposable resources engineered to saturate American protections, while China would execute the precision blow that could cripple a carrier. Tehran secured the chance to prove it could legitimately endanger U.S. maritime strength. Beijing obtained actual combat intelligence on their flagship stealth fighter against the planet's most sophisticated air protection platforms. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' Naval Division launched the offensive with calculated exactness. The flood of speed attack vessels and UAVs started their advance from hidden coastal stations, shortly following 0300 hours, preserving total radio blackout until the terminal assault phase. These weren't advanced armaments. Numerous vessels carried nothing beyond 107mm rocket launchers, and the drones spanned from commercial quadcopters equipped with explosives to bigger loitering weapons. Yet sophistication wasn't the objective. Quantity was the armament. The strategy was to flood American protection mechanisms with countless low-value objectives, compelling the consumption of million-dollar interceptors against thousand-dollar dangers, and generating monitoring pandemonium through raw numbers. The destroyer USS John Finn, stationed on the northern screening position, initiated fire initially. At 14 kilometers, its 5-inch deck cannon started pounding the closing surface swarm with crushing precision, each round generating columns of white spray and mangled steel. Concurrently, RIM-116 rolling airframe missiles started deploying in swift succession against the drone clusters, their infrared trackers securing onto the UAV's thermal signatures. The cruiser USS Mobile Bay entered the protection effort, its SM-2 missiles climbing upward to attack the bigger UAVs at maximum distance. The carrier's dedicated protection mechanisms triggered RIM-16 to evolved Sea Sparrow missiles racing from their platforms in clusters of 4, each barrage aimed at distinct drone arrays. In the opening 8 minutes, 37 UAVs fragmented in spectacular explosions. 4 A-18F Super Hornets scrambled from the carrier surface, their afterburners streaking orange blazes through the pre-dawn blackness, as they hurried to create an exterior protection barrier. For 23 minutes, the protection execution was textbook flawless. The Aegis warfare platform directed a coordination of annihilation, its processors determining engagement calculations quicker than any human team could analyze. Speed vessels detonated in progression as missiles discovered their objectives. Drones plummeted from altitude, tumbling erratically before crashing into the Gulf. Yet with each accomplished neutralization, the Lincoln battle group's weapon reserves diminished lighter. The Iranians were exchanging vessels manned by fanatical volunteers and inexpensive drones for armament platforms that exceeded most countries' yearly military spending. The calculations of depletion were functioning precisely as Tehran had projected. At 0:10 hours, the subsequent assault struck with crushing synchronization. 3 installations of Ghadir anti-vessel cruise missiles hidden in fortified locations along the Karg Island installation obtained their launch clearance. The scheduling was surgical. The Lincoln Battle Group had recently consumed roughly 60% of its immediately accessible short-distance interceptors. The Ghadir missiles, far more advanced than the opening swarm, deployed in a staggered pattern engineered to converge from several bearing vectors at once. They streaked across the wave tops at below 5 meters elevation, their radar profiles merging with ocean interference, trajectory angles perpetually adjusting to counter-protection monitoring. The mobile bay's Aegis platform executed superbly, effectively neutralizing 6 of the 8 missiles targeting the primary ray. Yet the protection coverage was starting to reveal vulnerabilities. Alert sirens wailed across all vessels in the formation. Sailors rushed to emergency control positions. The genuine confrontation had barely started. Then the atmosphere itself appeared to fracture. At 0:13 hours, the E-D Advanced Hawkeye identified abnormal radar contacts to the north, faint, sporadic, nearly spectral signatures that materialized and vanished from displays like apparitions. The Chinese J-20s had been airborne for 47 minutes, executing a carefully charted low-elevation path through the Zagros Mountains before banking southeast. The KJ-500 aircraft orbiting deep within Iranian territory had been constructing a live picture of the American formation's precise locations and protection configuration, transmitting targeting intelligence continuously to the attack formation. When the stealth fighters ascended to their deployment elevation and unsealed their armament compartments, the momentary increase in their radar profile was identified. Yet critical seconds were sacrificed in categorization and danger evaluation. By the moment the combat scenario crystallized and hostile fast movers were verified, the J-20s had already attained launch specifications at 240 kilometers. 12 YJ-1 anti-ship missiles released in almost flawless coordination, their solid rocket propulsion firing with intense white bursts observable even at that range. The armaments accelerated viciously, surpassing Mach 5 as they ascended in ballistic trajectories before tilting into their final descent configurations. These weren't the subsonic cruise weapons the Aegis platform was engineered to counter. These were kinetic destruction vehicles, sacrificing explosive capacity for absolute speed and the category of collision force that could bore through armored plate like tissue. The Super Hornets on combat air patrol tried to engage the J-20s, yet the Chinese fighters had already pivoted direction, plunging back toward Iranian territory where their diminished radar profiles and accompanying electronic countermeasures made continuous monitoring almost unachievable. The subsequent 11 minutes transformed into a confusion of disciplined pandemonium and instantaneous judgments. Further Super Hornets deployed from the Lincoln's surface, their catapult launches synchronized between the carrier's protection missile deployments. The complete battle group converted into one integrated armament mechanism, all detection feeding intelligence to all shooters, targeting hierarchies adjusting microsecond by microsecond. As dangers multiplied and closed, the SM-6 missiles constituting the furthest protection tier attacked the approaching YJ-12s at maximum distance. 8 deployments against 8 objectives. 5 hypersonic weapons detonated in intense fireballs at elevations exceeding 60,000 feet. The surviving 7 pressed forward, now blended with the terminal surge of Ghadir cruise weapons and scores of remaining Iranian drones. In a 3-dimensional danger setting of nightmarish intricacy, the USS John Finn transformed into the concentration point for 3 of the Chinese weapons. The destroyer had previously depleted majority of its vertical deployment cells against the opening flood, retaining solely its proximity armament platforms for terminal protection. The phalanx cannons rotated with mechanical exactness, their monitoring radar secured, barrels starting to revolve at a combined velocity of 8,000 projectiles per minute. The 2 Suez installations generated a genuine barrier of tungsten in the atmosphere, a shifting screen of steel through which nothing physical could persist. To J-12s fragmented in the terminal 3 seconds of descent, their debris generating a lethal shower of shrapnel that peppered the thin superstructure. The 3rd weapon, nevertheless, penetrated the protection barrage at a trajectory the phalanx couldn't entirely monitor. It contacted the destroyer precisely above the waterline amidships, traveling at Mach 4.7. The collision was devastating. The missile's penetrating payload bored through the hull as though it wasn't present, exploding deep within the propulsion compartments. The blast tore through internal divisions, severed electrical conduits, demolished piping networks carrying everything from seawater to petroleum. Subsequent conflagrations erupted instantly as breached fuel conduits combusted. The destroyer's complete power network went black in under 2 seconds. In the propulsion chamber, the heat spiked above 500 degrees as vapor from fractured conduits saturated the space. Emergency response units sprinted through smoke-saturated corridors, their thermal vision apparatus barely cutting through the suffocating black haze. Within minutes, the Finn was immobilized, tilting 7 degrees to starboard, her drive mechanism eliminated, advancing flooding endangering to overwhelm her sealed sections. The Abraham Lincoln confronted an even more concentrated barrage. 4 J-20 weapons and 6 Ghadir cruise missiles intersected on the carrier, in what constituted a precisely scheduled hammer impact engineered to converge. Within a 15-second interval, the carrier's protection platforms released everything at once. Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles deploying in continuous discharge pattern, rolling airframe missiles attacking from several launchers, and 3 phalanx CIWS installations generating overlapping kill zones. The electromagnetic setting transformed so saturated with radar frequency that birds flying within 5 kilometers of the vessel started dropping from altitude, their neural systems overwhelmed. The cacophony was beyond description. Missile deployments, cannon platforms, alert signals, shouted directives over communication networks, all merging into a continuous thunder that would render personnel temporarily hearing impaired. 8 of the 10 weapons perished in the protection barrage, yet the price was apparent. 3 interceptor eliminations happened so proximate to the carrier that their detonations transmitted shrapnel streaming across the island's superstructure. SPY-1 radar installations fractured. Communications equipment were severed. Personnel trapped on exposed platforms were struck down by steel debris, traveling at supersonic speeds. 1 compromised Ghadir weapon, its navigation mechanism eliminated, but its propulsion still operating, spun erratically before crashing into the carrier's port quarter underneath the flight surface. The payload exploded on collision, creating a 15-meter fracture in the hull, the blast extending inward through to sections and triggering conflagrations that would demand emergency response units 3 hours to completely extinguish. Then the terminal YJ-1 arrived. It had somehow navigated through the complete protection screen past the SM-6 South, past the evolved Sea Sparrows, past even the rolling airframe missiles. Solely the phalanx systems remained, and the weapon's final speed was fundamentally too extreme. The CIWS attacked, tracers streaking toward the plunging danger, certain projectiles even contacting the weapon's frame, yet insufficient to activate the payload or modify its flight path. It contacted the flight surface at an 80-degree trajectory, traveling at Mach 5.2, the kinetic force alone matching multiple tons of explosive. The weapon bored completely through the flight surface, through the hangar surface underneath, and exploded in the carrier's third level. The blast generated a depression 8 meters in width, the explosion extending upward and outward, warping steel panels, severing hydraulic conduits, and eliminating to F-18s that were being arranged for deployment. Aviation fuel from breached aircraft reservoirs combusted, contributing to the inferno. Almost a quarter of the flight surface was transformed instantly unusable. Even as the carrier confrontation continued, American attack aircraft were previously inbound toward the Iranian shoreline. The Super Hornets arrived low and rapid, their armament compartments loaded with AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation weapons that tracked on the Iranian radar broadcasts like predators. The Ghadir weapon installations, having disclosed their locations through their deployments, became designated objectives. The HARMs converged initially, their payloads engineered particularly to annihilate radar sites. Then arrived the AGM-15 for joint standoff weapons glide munitions with adequate distance to maintain the deploying aircraft outside the targeting envelope of Iranian air protections. Above, EA-18G Growlers transmitted megawatts of electronic countermeasure frequency, generating passages of radar nullification through which the attack aircraft operated with freedom. The elimination of the Iranian locations was systematic and total. The initial Ghadir weapon installation on Karg Island vanished in a progression of blasts that appeared on seismic equipment in adjacent nations. The subsequent installation, trying to displace following discharge, was intercepted in the exposed with cluster weapons that shredded transports and personnel with identical effectiveness. Subsequent detonations cascaded across the shore locations as munitions reserve zones ignited from temperature, conflagrations extending through the complexes, dense black vapor climbing thousands of feet into the morning atmosphere. The Iranian speed vessel fled and UAV arrays were being methodically annihilated, absent the diversion of the more advanced weapon dangers. American protection aircraft discovered their objectives with merciless effectiveness. Speed vessels detonated in swift progression, their personnel never obtaining the opportunity to discharge their armaments. Drones were eliminated from altitude from everything from missiles to continuous bursts of 20mm cannon discharge. The Persian Gulf transformed into a cemetery, its waters saturated with wreckage, blazing petroleum, fractured fiberglass hulls, and casualties. Of the 140 vessels that initiated the strike, solely 23 would struggle back to Iranian harbors, numerous so compromised they would never operate again. The UAV casualties reached 90%. Solely 8 drones endured to be retrieved. The Chinese J-20s were sprinting for Iranian territory, their assignment complete, yet their withdrawal far from assured. 2F A-18F Super Hornets had pushed their combat air patrol to engage, and as the stealth fighters ascended out of the geography concealment and triggered afterburners for peak velocity, their radar profiles expanded on American detection. The F-A-18 secured radar contacts at once, their aviators' armaments active, digits on activators. 4 AIM-1 to ODM ROMs deployed in swift progression, the armaments accelerating to Mach 4 as they pursued their objectives. The J-20s tried evasive tactics, releasing chaff and triggering their electronic defenses, yet 2 of the Chinese aircraft were fundamentally too delayed in their reactions. The initial J-20 detonated in an explosion observable for 50 kilometers. The subsequent absorbed a weapon impact to its port propulsion, the aircraft sustaining regulated descent for 90 seconds before the aviator evacuated over Iranian geography, his parachute deploying as the damaged fighter spiraled into the terrain underneath. The surviving 10 J-20s entered into Iranian territory where triggered air protection mechanisms generated a shielding coverage that compelled the chasing Super Hornets to terminate pursuit. As morning illuminated completely over the Persian Gulf, the magnitude of the confrontation became crushingly obvious. The USS John Finn, fatally compromised, was under transport by the fleet ocean tug USNS Catawba, emergency equipment fighting to maintain the flooding confined, while helicopters transported further emergency response machinery. The Abraham Lincoln, though still floating and capable of restricted functions, had experienced harm that would demand months of restoration in a significant shipyard. 47 American mariners were deceased with 123 injured. Iranian casualties surpassed 400, their shore protections in devastation, their asymmetric maritime capacity decimated. 2 Chinese aviators were absent, though Iranian broadcasting would subsequently assert both retrieved alive. The geopolitical ramifications cascaded outward with seismic magnitude. The confrontation demolished core assumptions about carrier battle group invincibility and proved that synchronized strikes merging quantity and quality could breach even the most advanced protections. Territorial partners from Saudi Arabia to Israel were compelled to reconsider the dependability of American military security. China's readiness to straight attack U.S. units outside conventional conflict territories constituted a boundary violation that fundamentally modified tactical assessments across both the Middle East and Indo-Pacific arenas. The period of uncontested American maritime superiority in challenged waters had terminated in the pre-dawn blackness of the Persian Gulf.